Since the Disney Cruise Line canceled all their cruises last year because of coronavirus, there's been one big question that has been constantly asked and still to this day is being asked. When is it gonna come back? Now last year I did make a video talking about all of this, and I did make a very optimistic prediction, and let's just say I wasn't even close. In my defense, right, I did say that it was very optimistic and that most likely I was wrong, so I do have that going for me. But I think this time I am going to make a prediction and I think it will be accurate. But there's more information to talk about and there's more positive news than negative news. So let's go into that. Now, just like last year, there are three major factors that we need to talk about: the US government, Disney Cruise Line itself, and also foreign countries. Now, I feel like the current conditional sail order by the CDC is the most important thing that we do need to talk about. So we're going to go into that first, then we'll move on to the Disney Cruise Line and foreign countries. Now, as some of you may know, when the CDC no sail order expired on October 31st, 2020, CDC implemented a brand new conditional sail order that gave the framework for cruise lines to finally get back to cruising. Now, it is long, it is 40 pages, it's a long read, but if you would like to read it for yourself to see everything that the CDC said, I will link the PDF to those 40 pages in the description below. So in this conditional sail order, the CDC did break down the return to cruising into 4 phases. Now in phase 1, it's more like the preparation phase, I guess. It's the cruise lines get all their cruise ships, right? They're back in US soil and they need to prepare their cruise ships to match the guidelines by the CDC and just prepare everything in order to ensure a safe cruise for not just the passengers but the crew itself. Here you're gonna have, social distancing. They're gonna require masks. They're gonna have to space out their tables in their dining rooms, space out the seating in auditoriums. Just prepare everything in order to make sure that social distancing can be met and to ensure the safety of the passengers. Now, in terms of the crew, they could hire crew, but they're gonna have to go through observation periods. They have to go through a 14-day quarantine. They have to get tested weekly. It's a long process, but that is the first step into finally getting back to cruising and just ensuring the safety of their passengers and their crew. Now, when the cruise lines do everything that they need to do on their cruise ships, they submit the documents, they fill out the reports, and the CDC gives them the okay and all clear, they can move on to phase 2, which is conditional simulated voyages. Now, these test sailings, it is to show the CDC that the cruise ships are ready and that they did everything right in order to ensure the safety and security of their crew and passengers and that they could have safe cruises. Now, here in these test sailings, it's really complicated and there is a lot to it. Now, the people that are going to be on board the ship, they're going to be volunteers. It cannot be workers of the cruise line company, and it cannot be people that were guaranteed employment on the cruise line because of these test sailings. They have to be random volunteers, and they have to go through this observation period before. They need to not have any pre-existing conditions. They have to get a document from their doctor saying that it is okay for them to do these test sailings. Once they get all of that, you could bring them on board, and you have to do everything as if you are going to have an actual cruise, right? You have to have your dining, you have to have your onboard activities, you need to have your excursions, you have to have everything going. You want to show the CDC, look, I could do all of this and nothing happened. I could do it, let me sail. That's basically what these test sailings are for. So not only are they going to test their onboard activities and dining and all of that, they're also going to test different emergency situations, right? So emergency dockings, evacuations. They're also going to test quarantines. They're going to do all of this in order to show that not only can they guarantee the safety of their passengers, but if something goes wrong, they're prepared. So if you are looking to be one of these volunteers in test sailings for any cruise line, trust me, I've looked into it. I want to do it. I would love to be a volunteer for the Disney Cruise Line. Just keep in mind that it is going to be a lot and it's going to be relaxing but also stressful at the same time. Just keep that in mind. Now, as of the day of recording, the only cruise company that has actually taken the steps to look for volunteers has been Royal Caribbean. We'll talk about that shortly. All right, but let's say everything went right. All your test sailings went smoothly. Nothing went wrong. That's awesome. What's the next phase? Well, it is a sailing certification. With everything that you did in phase 1 and in phase 2, you're going to submit your documents and your reports to the CDC. The CDC is going to review it on a ship-by-ship basis. It's not really just a cruise line in general. Like, if the Disney Cruise Line were to submit these sailing certifications, it would have to be one for each ship. And it's weird because one could get accepted, but one could get rejected. So for example, let's say that the Disney Fantasy gets their sailing certification, but the Wonder doesn't. The Fantasy can move on to phase 4, but the Wonder can't. It's very complicated, but that is the next step. It is basically the CDC reviewing everything that you did and giving you the okay to move on to phase 4. And what is phase 4? Well, it is back to sailing. This is finally getting back to commercial cruising, right? You could bring passengers on board and you could have your cruises. Now, there are some limitations to it. For example, none of your itineraries can be longer than 7 days. Also, another thing that the CDC did say was that if there is ever an outbreak on the ship, you would have to quarantine everyone. You see, that is why you need to prepare for quarantines in your test sailings, right? You would have to quarantine everyone, turn the ship around, and head back. The cruise ends right there. You get back. They go through all the procedures in order to make sure that everyone gets out safely and everyone is isolated. And then after that, the ship cannot continue with their cruising until further notice. Most likely just like keeping the crew in observation, testing, making sure nothing else went wrong, disinfecting the ship, all of that. Then after that, most likely you could look into finally resuming cruising. But if anything goes wrong, that's the end of the cruise for everyone. Now, that is currently the CDC guideline for returning to cruise. Now, where are we currently? Phase 1. Yeah, ever since the order was put into place November 1st, 2020, the only progress that has been made is that the cruise ships were able to bring their ships back into US waters and they started preparing, but the CDC hasn't given the cruise ships the documents and reports needed in order to continue from phase 1 to phase 2. But that's not the only thing. A couple of days ago, the CDC director, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, she was asked about the cruise lines and when it's going to come back by Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski. Now, Senator Murkowski, she was asking about the cruising and the tourism industry because tourism is a huge part of the Alaskan economy, and she was like, you know, the economy is at a stall. What is going on? Can you give us some guidance as to when the cruise lines will be able to return? And her response was kind of worrisome. This is what she said. We have provided technical assistance on the conditional sail, where we've provided a 4-phase strategy on how we could get sail open. We're in phase 1 of that, moving towards phase 2. Now, that is pretty good news. You know, we're still in phase 1, but we are moving towards phase 2. But it's what she says after that's a bit worrisome. She says, this is an interagency decision. It is not a decision solely up to the CDC, so I would be remiss if I would do that by myself because the decision is not solely up to us. What? I just find it a bit worrisome because this is the CDC Conditional Sail Order. Why is it that the CDC doesn't have the sole power to accept the cruise lines to move on to phase 2? And with that response, I mean, it's worded weirdly. Maybe it was just because she was on the spot or something. I don't know. But it just sounds like not only do they not have sole power, but they don't have any power in this decision. I mean, I don't know. It just kind of feels a little worrisome that the CDC cannot act on their own sail order to allow cruise ships to move on. It just felt weird. I don't know, but hopefully we finally move on to phase 2 and get those test sailings up and running very soon so that we could finally get back to cruising. But besides that, there is some positive news from the government front. The Biden administration has come out saying that they would like to loosen up the restrictions on international travel, mainly from Canada, Mexico, the UK, and Europe around mid-May. So that is actually huge news, just getting international travel back into the United States. And it is positive news that could potentially affect the cruise line industry. Another thing that was said was that the COVID guidelines that there currently are can be loosened up a little bit around July for the 4th of July celebration. So, you know, we're just seeing everything kind of moving in the right direction. It is a little bit slow on the cruising front, but things are moving forward, so that's a good thing. Now let's move on to the Disney company itself. So during a Disney shareholder meeting that happened earlier this month in March, Bob Chapek was asked about the Disney Cruise Line and when it was going to return, and he responded by saying that he's hopeful that the Disney Cruise Line can come back in the fall. That is huge news because we finally get an actual prediction from the Disney company itself. I mean, this is the CEO of the Disney company finally saying, hey, look, we're trying to see if we can get the cruise line industry back in fall. I mean, that's the first time we actually hear anything from Disney in regards to when the Disney Cruise Line is going to come back. Now, it is a hopeful prediction because it would rely on the CDC, you know, moving ahead in those phases. And it also depends on Disney doing well on those test sailings. If anything goes wrong, that could really falter Disney's chances of resuming cruising this year. But currently, in the day of recording, all cruises through May have been canceled, but June, July, and August, they still haven't been canceled, and they're actually still listed on the Disney website. So technically speaking, you can book a cruise for June, But I do expect all June, July, and August cruises to be canceled very soon. I'm sorry to anyone that has a cruise booked in that time frame, but I do think that your cruises will be canceled. But what about September and October? Now, that is where things start to get interesting. If everything goes right for Disney, right? Let's say that the CDC finally gets to moving and you can finally do your test sailings, and then Disney starts to do it. If everything goes right, I think that we could see the Disney Cruise Line make a return maybe around mid to late September or in the beginning of October. This is huge. I mean, I do have a cruise booked for October 2nd, so I still have my fingers crossed that it will go ahead. But I do honestly think that if everything goes right, Disney could see their ship sailing again in September. Now, other things that are happening with the Disney Cruise Line that are giving me positive vibes is the fact that they are announcing more cruises that are coming in 2022, which means, Disney wants to get these things up and running already. They're announcing future cruises, and also they're hiring characters to be on board the ships. So they're hiring crew, they're hiring characters, they're announcing new itineraries. Disney wants to resume cruising, and I am confident that Disney will do everything right in those test sailings because they always put guest safety first. So I think everything's going to go right, and I honestly do think that cruising can resume in September. And hopefully I'm right on this prediction, because my last prediction was just horribly wrong. Now, there's one more factor that we do need to talk about. It is foreign ports. Now, this isn't really that big of a factor as it was last year, but it still is a factor to take into account. Under U.S. maritime law, a ship leaving U.S. soil cannot come back to the U.S. without going to a foreign port first. Me personally, I don't see the point of this rule. It just kind of seems weird. But it is there, and the cruise ships do need to follow that rule. So let's say that everything goes right, your ship is ready to set sail. Where do you go? Your solution? The Bahamas. The Bahamas heavily rely on tourism, and the cruise line industry is a huge part of tourism in the Bahamas. The Bahamian government has already come out saying that they want cruises to resume. They're eager to bring them back just to get that segment of their economy back up and running. So they're open for tourism. So the Bahamas really want cruising to come back. They're eager to get them back. And two cruise lines, Royal Caribbean and Crystal, have already announced that they're actually going to start sailing from the Bahamas starting in June and July. So that is a clear and obvious indicator that the Bahamas are welcoming the cruise lines to come back. So all the major cruise lines, including Disney, they have their own private islands in the Bahamas. They could always make stops at Nassau, which is the capital of the Bahamas. So that is why it's not that big of a factor as it was last year when the Bahamas were still closed. Now, there are other places that you need to look into, like for example the Grand Cayman Islands. They're still not allowing people to come in, and Disney's 7-night Western Caribbean cruises do stop at the Grand Cayman Islands. And not just that, it's also that the Grand Cayman Islands are looking into further expanding the limitations on cruise lines permanently. So if that does happen, Disney will probably have to look for a separate port in their Western Caribbean cruises. You also have Key West, which passed a referendum which limits the access of cruise ships to Key West itself. Now, Disney did go to Key West a lot in their Bahama cruises, so Disney will have to look for somewhere else. But that is a problem for the future, right? Right now, the most important thing is finally getting through those phases in the CDC Conditional Sail Order and finally getting cruising back up and running. Now, in terms of my predictions, like I said, I think that the Disney Cruise Line will be coming back in September or in October. And in terms of their test sailings, we haven't really received news from the Disney Cruise Line itself. Like I said, the only cruise company that has actually looked for volunteers is Royal Caribbean. They set up a website where you could go sign up. I think they have like 100,000 volunteers already. So Royal Caribbean, I mean, is like one step ahead. But again, they need to move on to phase 2 first, and the CDC needs to give them the documents in order for them to move on. When will Disney's test sailings happen? Most likely in the summer, in June, July, and August. If everything goes right, I think September and October, we're finally going to get some Disney cruises. Well, let me know in the comments below what you think about all this information and when you think the Disney Cruise Line will finally return to sailing. I would love to hear from you. Also, if you enjoyed today's video, smash that like button and hit subscribe. I upload a brand new video every Wednesday. Thank you for being part of the Disney family, and see you real soon.